In controlled deception experiments at the University of California, researchers found that participants rarely betrayed lies through content errors. Instead, measurable inconsistencies appeared in response latency, facial timing, and post-speech motor adjustments within milliseconds of answering. The statement was always clean. The system producing it was not. In controlled deception studies conducted across multiple universities in the late 20th century, researchers began noticing something unexpected. When participants were instructed to lie about simple, low-stakes information, such as the contents of a card or a personal preference, the verbal content remained stable, coherent, and logically consistent. Yet the recordings revealed something else entirely. Not contradictions in speech, not hesitation in ideas, but irregularities in timing, rhythm, and micro-adjustments in expression that occurred before the lie was ever fully formed. These were not dramatic tells. They were fragments of behavior measured in fractions of seconds. The unsettling finding was this: deception is rarely exposed by what is said, but by how reality briefly destabilizes around the moment it is constructed. So the question becomes, if lies do not reveal themselves in language, but in timing and micro-behavior, how many signals of deception are being produced in plain sight and consistently missed? This analysis operates through a single psychological lens: micro-inconsistency detection. A micro-inconsistency is any deviation between expected behavioral flow and actual real-time execution, measured not in contradictions of content, but in disruptions of cognitive rhythm. It includes response latency shifts, eye movement hesitation patterns, posture micro-adjustments, and speech initiation delays that occur below conscious perception. The key principle is simple but rarely understood. Human cognition does not produce deception smoothly. It assembles it. Daniel Kahneman's dual process model explains part of this. System 2 cognition, responsible for constructed responses, introduces measurable delay when overriding automatic truth-based recall. And Robert Cialdini's work on influence shows something related but socially driven. Cognitive load increases when individuals manage impression consistency. By the end of this video, the viewer will be able to recognize how deception leaves behind a structural footprint, not in words but in the breakdown of behavioral timing. Not what people say, but the micro gaps between intention and execution. In deception research, one of the most replicated findings is increased response latency when individuals fabricate information. Not because liars are always slow, but because truth retrieval is direct, while fabrication requires assembly. In simple terms, truth is recalled, lies are constructed. The brain does not store lies, it builds them in real time under pressure. This creates measurable delays as working memory integrates fabricated elements while maintaining coherence. In experimental settings, even 200 at the 500 millisecond delays correlate with increased cognitive load during deception tasks. Detection tool: observe the gap between question completion and answer initiation, not the answer itself, the initiation point. A consistent delay pattern, especially when repeated across neutral questions, suggests cognitive construction rather than retrieval. This is where micro-inconsistency begins, not in speech but in timing, and timing never lies about effort. Facial expression is often assumed to reflect emotion directly, but in controlled observations, what emerges is more precise. Emotional expressions often lag behind internal cognitive shifts during deception. The result is desynchronization, a smile that arrives 300 milliseconds too late, a neutral expression that lingers beyond contextual relevance, a micro-expression that appears and disappears before verbal alignment is complete. Emotion does not fail during deception. Coordination does. The brain's limbic system may generate emotional signals, but executive control regulates outward display. During deception, these systems temporarily fall out of phase. Detection tool: focus on transitions, not expressions. What matters is not the smile or lack of it, but whether it aligns with conversational meaning at the exact moment of emergence. Micro-inconsistency here is temporal, not visible in isolation. When individuals lie, their cognitive system reallocates resources toward message control. This reduces baseline bodily regulation. What appears externally are small, often unconscious adjustments. Shifting weight immediately after answering, recentering posture following a statement, hand repositioning that breaks stillness after verbal delivery. These are not nervous tics in the casual sense. They are stabilization behaviors. The body compensates when cognitive load disrupts equilibrium. Stillness is the default state of cognitive confidence. Disruption of stillness often indicates internal recalibration. Detection tool. Compare pre-answer and post-answer body stability. Truth-telling typically maintains continuity. Deception often produces post-response correction behaviors. The inconsistency is not movement, it is recovery from movement. Speech during deception is rarely grammatically incorrect. Instead, it is structurally fragmented in timing, subtle elongations of filler sounds, uneven pacing between syllables. Micropauses inserted where none are syntactically required. These disruptions are not random. They reflect real-time cognitive resource allocation. The brain is managing 3 tasks simultaneously: constructing content, monitoring plausibility, controlling social impression. Something eventually becomes delayed. Speech fluency is not linguistic. It is cognitive bandwidth made audible. Detection tool. Listen for rhythm consistency rather than vocabulary choice. A stable speaker maintains predictable cadence even under stress. A constructing mind does not. Layer 5. Gaze anchoring and attention displacement. Contrary to popular belief, liars do not simply avoid eye contact. The real signal is more precise: gaze anchoring disruption. During truthful recall, gaze tends to stabilize on environmental reference points. During fabrication, attention becomes internally directed, reducing external anchoring consistency. This creates subtle scanning behavior, not avoidance, but displacement. The eyes do not escape truth-telling, they stabilize it. Detection tool. Observe whether gaze returns to a consistent anchor point after speaking. Instability in gaze return patterns often reflects ongoing cognitive monitoring. This completes the first structural layer. Deception is not a single signal. It is a coordination failure across systems. But here is where it becomes more complex. None of these indicators in isolation are reliable. In fact, high-stress truthful individuals often display identical micro-inconsistencies. This is where misinterpretation begins, because the human brain does not differentiate between deception and cognitive overload at the motor level. It only registers strain, which means anxiety, fear, social pressure, or memory uncertainty can produce identical behavioral artifacts. So the real challenge is not identifying micro-inconsistencies, it is distinguishing intentional construction from incidental load, and that distinction is far more unstable than most people assume. If micro-inconsistencies are universal outputs of cognitive strain, then something becomes unavoidable. Every human being, under certain conditions, produces signals indistinguishable from deception. This includes honest individuals under pressure, memory, uncertainty, or emotional conflict, which means behavioral truth detection is never absolute. It is probabilistic interpretation layered over noise. The unsettling implication is not that people lie constantly, it is that human expression is structurally unreliable as a direct reflection of internal state. What is seen is always a filtered version, stabilized, edited, and constrained by cognitive load. So the question shifts. Not who is lying, but what conditions are distorting clarity in this moment. Because distortion is the baseline, not the exception. Now that the mechanism is understood, interpretation changes from detection to pattern recognition. 3 principles become essential. Do not evaluate single signals, evaluate clusters across time. One inconsistency is noise. Repeated coordination failure is structure. Separate emotional stress from cognitive fabrication. Stress creates noise. Construction creates pattern repetition under specific triggers. Establish behavioral baseline before deviation analysis. Without baseline, Micro-inconsistency has no meaning. Most misinterpretations of human behavior come from observing deviation without understanding normal rhythm first. And finally, the most important shift. Human behavior is not a transparent window into truth. It is a dynamic system constantly balancing memory, emotion, and social regulation under limited cognitive bandwidth. Understanding micro-inconsistencies does not make people readable. It makes them computationally interpretable. And that distinction changes how every interaction is perceived. Because once timing becomes visible, language is no longer the primary source of meaning, it is only the surface layer. Next, the focus shifts deeper into how authority itself manipulates these same microstructures to shape belief without a single explicit statement.